All right, we ready? Here we go. A lot of work to do today. Midterm 2 is slowly rolling around, so while you're taking a break after midterm 1, don't. All right? There's something in statistics called mean reversion. The people who did really, really well on midterm 1 usually tank on midterm 2, and the people who got a wake-up call on midterm 1 usually do really well on midterm 2. So let's show the statisticians who's boss by having the people who did really, really well on midterm 1 continue to do really well, and the people who didn't do so well doing really well. I think that would be my preferred outcome. And then you can figure out how the scale works against that. But the point, I have no point to make. I only have economics to talk about. Continue that joke on your own. Pieces of information. If I seem more crazy than usual over the next couple of weeks, I'm about to start traveling, coming back to teach. So I'm going to New York tomorrow, then I'm coming back, then I'm going to Shanghai, then I'm coming back, then I'm going to Tokyo, then I'm coming back, then I'm going to DC, and then I'm coming back, and then I'm going to DC and coming back all within 3.5 weeks. So it's nutty. But the climate is keeping a lot of us busy. Where are we? I have office hours today. I'm trying to break my non-pre-exam record of one person in 1.5 hours, so feel free to come visit me. I have lots of things to tell you. Where we were last time, we talked about short-run costs. So we're now quite comfortable that the total costs in the short run are simply our capital costs, which are fixed, which I can't change, so they're sunk, and my variable costs, which in our simple model are just labor costs, wage times the number of units of labor you use. We also then derived these new measures of costs that we're actually going to use to figure out what firms actually do in terms of how much output they produce and what input combinations they use. So we came up with average total cost, which is just total cost divided by output, average fixed cost, which is total sunk cost, total fixed cost, total capital cost divided by output, and average variable cost, which is total variable cost, which is just W times L divided by output. We also know that average fixed cost and average variable cost have to add up to average total cost. The last cost curve we derived, and we did this graphically and mathematically, was the so-called marginal cost. The marginal cost is to short-run cost what marginal product of labor is to the total product curve. It's the first partial derivative of the total cost curve, or for those of you who don't like calculus, and since it's not a prerequisite for this course, it's simply the change in short-run cost from increasing your output by 1 unit. Right? You can get marginal cost of the total cost and the total variable cost curve, since the only thing that changes in the short run as you increase output is labor. So the only thing changing costs is labor costs, so total variable costs and total cost, the slope of those will give you marginal costs. Then I told you that each firm essentially has the same accounting identity for total cost, which is just wage times the number of units of labor used, so your total labor cost, plus your total capital costs, which are rental rate per unit of capital per unit of time, times the number of units of capital you use. But firms clearly differ in the shape of their total average marginal cost curves, and the reason that is because they have different production functions. So we went through this nice simple example for a firm that only has variable costs to keep it really interesting, to show how you combine the production function with this total cost equation to get to these average variable, average total, and average fixed costs and marginal costs for a very, very simple cleaning firm. I'm going to give you another practice one that has some numbers in it that's not on your current problem set, so you can practice this again. But the reason firms differ in their cost structure is simply because technology differs across firms. Some firms are more efficient than others, and we will talk about what that means in terms of which firms actually produce output and how much they produce in the marketplace. So this is where we are, I think. What I want to talk about is one of the two things that are certain in life. Haha, very funny, Max. So taxes, right? We could talk about taxes for hours. There's a subfield of economics that deals with nothing but taxation. You could take a 3-course sequence in graduate school that tells you more than you'd ever want to know about taxes. Taxes are complicated. If you look at the U.S. income tax code alone, you could spend a career trying to study this. Are there any accounting majors in here? Anybody in accounting? No? All right. Well, for those of you in the business school who are majoring in accounting, good for you. There'll be a job for you, and you're going to be making lots of money, and you're going to work an intermediate amount of reasonable hours. All right? So one of my favorite graduation speeches last year was by Emily Oster, who congratulated the people who are enthusiastic about things that nobody wants to do. So because you'll have a job, they usually pay pretty well, and yeah. So back to the topic at hand, Max. So I want to talk about 3 very specific types of taxes. That's a bad choice of words, because one of the taxes I want to talk about is a specific tax. I want to talk about 3 types of taxes today that are relevant for the firm, and these are taxes that we encounter in day-to-day life all the time. The first one is called a specific tax, and this is a word, when you use that with economists, they'll know what you're talking about. So if I tell Walter there's a specific tax each time I read your dissertation draft of 1 pint of beer, he'll know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Anybody else, if you use those words, they won't know what you're talking about. So a specific tax is a per unit tax, which is a dollars per unit tax of output. That means each time you produce 1 unit of output, the firm has to pay a certain dollar number. So a good, or the consumer, it doesn't matter who pays it, as we'll see later. But the point here is a per unit tax is a fixed dollar number per unit produced. So a good example here is, for example, a bridge toll. So how much do you pay each time you cross the Bay Bridge? How's that? Yeah, I like that. That's a good answer. Depends on what time it is. It's a peak pricing scheme, which is exciting. We'll talk about that one later. But each time you cross the Bay Bridge at, let's say, 11 a.m. on a Saturday, you pay $5, right? So for each bridge crossing, you pay $5. Each unit you consume, there's a $5 tax. That's a good example of a specific tax. There's something called an ad valorem tax. So I went to a Northern Bavarian high school, very bad weather, interesting politics, and lots of Latin. So I took 9 years of Latin, which is actually pretty good for you, I think, but it's 9 years of your life, 5 hours a week. So I know what ad valorem means. It means value added, all right? 9 years, thank you. So ad valorem tax is simply a tax that is specified as a percent of dollars spent on a purchase. So a good example of this is a friend of mine from London came to visit, and there's a certain type of handbag by some French designer company called Givenchy or something like that that was sold out in the UK. So she came to San Francisco. She's going to kill me if she listens to this, but that's okay. She came to San Francisco. We sat in the backyard, drank a bunch of beer, and then the next day she went to San Francisco. There's a store called, it's named after a dinosaur, Barney's. There we go. Barney's. And bought this handbag. And the handbag was more money than I pay per month for the schooling of my young child. Very expensive handbag. And then on top, shocking, what do you have to do? You pay a sales tax. Is it a fixed dollar amount independent of the value of the transaction? No, it's a percent. Right? In California, it's somewhere near 9%. It changes all the time because we need more income for the state. So you pay a percent of the dollars of the transaction. That's an ad valorem tax. So the actual dollar amount you pay in tax depends on the value of the transaction. That's different from the specific tax where the actual dollar amount stays constant. So a handbag specific tax would be $5 per handbag purchase versus a value-added tax is 7.75 or 9% of the value of the purse that you pay in tax and pass on to the government. A lump sum tax is slightly different. Lump sum taxes are silly things, as we'll see. Most economists don't like lump sum taxes, which is why they gave it a lame name to signal that it's a lame tax. Lump sum. Right? So a lump sum tax is essentially, flat tax is the wrong word. I don't want you to think about the sort of flat tax proposals in income taxes, but it's a tax that's independent of the quantity sold or purchased. It's a flat fee. If you want to operate a vegetarian hot dog stand with locally grown sauerkraut in front of the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, you will have to pay the city of San Francisco, I don't know, $5,000 to operate that. It's a lump sum tax, so you can operate. If you want to dispense liquor in San Francisco, what you got to do? Got to get a liquor license. Does that depend on how much liquor you sell? Nope, it's a flat fee of several tens of thousands of these things have incredible values, but it's independent of the quantity purchased. So what we're going to see quite a bit after we use these and actually see what happens to firms when we do these is that specific and ad valorem taxes actually influence firms and consumers' behaviors quite a bit, and a lump sum tax only affects the firm's bottom line but doesn't affect their optimal output quantity, which is something we may want to do in certain settings. So what I'm going to do in this class, since the specific and ad valorem tax are very, very similar, and we have a limited amount of time, right? I'm trying to maximize the amount of economics you get out of the limited amount of time we have together. I'm going to focus on these two taxes here. I'm going to focus on the specific and the lump sum tax. The ad valorem tax is in your textbook. I won't make you draw pictures of an ad valorem tax or any sort of long questions, but I'll expect that you can tell me in definition terms what the difference between an ad valorem and a specific tax is. So I'll focus on specific and lump sum taxes. Let's do two examples here and see what happens to firms if they all of a sudden have to pay a specific tax of $10 per unit of output. So the thing that graduate students hate most about me, among the many, many possible options they have, is my lack of consistent notation. So welcome to my world. Here's some new new notation. I apologize. I'll change that next year. $10 specific tax. What I'm going to say is that CB here is total costs before the tax gets charged, and CA is total costs after the tax gets charged. So if you wanted to make the notation consistent, you could just put a little T here, and then we have total costs. So this is now consistent with what we had before. So B stands for before, A stands for after. The problem with that, of course, is that A in Latin stands for ante, which means before. So if you have too much Latin, you may get confused. But the point here is B before, A after. So after I charge the firm $10 per unit, what happens to my total cost of production? Well, I still have to pay for my labor and capital to produce each unit of output. So the short run cost is the same as it was before I started charging this tax. But now, the darn regulator, that government, what's it doing? It's charging me $10 per unit. So in addition to my production costs, which are my total costs before, W times L plus R times K, I have to pay $10 per unit for all units I'm producing. So my total cost goes up by $10 per unit. What does this mean for my average variable costs? Well, my average variable costs, I still have to pay the labor costs for each unit as before, but now for each unit I produce, I have to pay an additional $10. And since these $10, the number of $10 bills I have to pay in the end total depends on the number of units I produce, the average variable cost is my labor cost per unit plus the tax cost per unit, which is $10. Right? So my average variable costs go up by exactly $10. What about my average total costs? Well, since average total costs are average fixed costs plus average variable costs, my average fixed costs don't change, right? They're the same. Capital isn't taxed or anything like that. The only thing that changes is average variable costs. So my average total costs are the same as before, plus I have to pay this $10 per unit fee now, this tax. What happens to my marginal costs? So before, if I wanted to produce one more unit, I just had to pay the incremental cost of labor of producing one more unit. But now, I have to do one more thing. I have to pay an additional $10 in taxes, or in a fee, in order to be allowed to produce that additional unit. So my marginal costs are my marginal costs of producing one more unit plus the $10 of the tax. So in summary, what happens? With that specific tax, total costs go up by 10 times Q, average variable cost goes up by $10 per unit, average total cost goes up by $10 per unit, and marginal cost goes up by $10 per unit. Max, I hate numbers. That's fine. I do too sometimes. So what does this mean in terms of pictures? Well, let's draw some pretty pictures. Well, I will try to draw a pretty picture. So what do we know? We know how to draw marginal cost, average variable, and average total cost curves, right? We learned that last time the shoelace came out, and it was pretty amazing. It was a really sort of defining moment for this course. So let's do this again. I'm going to draw my random, I'm just making this stuff up. This is my average variable cost curve. Actually, let me try and get this in one go, because I'm going to try some amazing drawing magic here. Can I turn this? All right, you ready? I'm not. That's pretty good. Average variable cost. The minimum is roughly here. Okay. Average total cost starts really far apart and then comes ever closer. Nah, let's try that again. Why do I not like this curve? Right, the minimum of average total cost is to the right of where the minimum of average variable cost is. So let's try this again. If you have trouble doing that, just draw yourself a point where you want this thing to minimize. There we go. Average total cost, right? The distance between the two is average fixed cost, so it should get ever closer together. And marginal cost goes through the minimum. Goes through the minimum of these curves, big dot theorem right here. And that's my marginal cost. Okay? This is my before I charge a tax. Again, beautiful, right? U-shaped average variable cost curve. Its minimum is roughly at 7 units. U-shaped average total cost curve here. Its minimum is somewhere between 8 and 9 units. And then the marginal cost curve drops, starts increasing, goes to the minimum of average variable, minimum of average total cost, and continues increasing. That's what this picture is supposed to look like, with a more confident hand. This looks a little bit squiggly. So if I charge a per unit tax of $10, let's just quickly go back here. What should happen to my average variable cost curve? Shifts left, right, up, down? Up, right, like the Pixar movie. Up by $10. What happens to my average total cost curve? Up by $10. What happens to my marginal cost curve? Up by $10. So at each quantity after the tax, my marginal cost after tax is $10 above what it was before at a given quantity. My average variable cost is $10 above where it was before at a given quantity. And my, which one am I missing? Average total cost too. So what happens? Let me see if I can pull this up. I'm not clear that this will work. I practiced it at home, but it was a bit of a failure at home, but I have confidence. Okay, so if we take this thing. Oh, there was a copy function, and now I'm all nervous here. Yeah, whatever. It doesn't let me do it. Okay, but I can do it by hand. I don't like you, Microsoft Surface. I never have. Whatever. let's do it by hand like they did in the old days. All right? Here we go. In red, I'm going to draw the average total cost curve, the average variable cost curve, and the marginal cost curve after the tax increase. So the easiest way I can think of doing this is start with the average variable cost curve. At 7 units, if the tax is $10, cost goes up by $10, right? At 3 units, if the tax is $10, right? The average variable cost is $10 higher, so roughly here. And then pick any other one up here that should go through here. So this thing should look something, oh, can you see how nervous I am and how much espresso I've had this morning? It shifts up by exactly $10 everywhere, right? It's like picking up that average variable cost curve and moving it north by $10. So that's the average variable cost curve. What about the average total cost curve? Same thing. So here, $10 above, here, $10 above, here, $10 above. So my new average, that's supposed to look, that doesn't look the same. It's supposed to be like a copy-paste job here. Slightly better. Entertaining, isn't it? There we go, let's try that again. This here is my average total cost after. So again, the distance here is exactly $10 everywhere. Okay, so just shift it up by $10. The way to convince yourself that you did this is at any quantity here, right, pick 7, the minimum point should be exactly 10 units above the old minimum point. And the same thing goes for average total cost here. So the new marginal cost curve, again, lies $10 above the old one. And I know where it goes. Here we go. Ready? Let's try this again. Yeah, almost. There's some important things to note here, right? So all I did is, if I wasn't so bad at drawing, what I've done here is I've taken the 3 blue curves, the marginal, the average variable, and the average total cost curve, hold down your shift button or your Apple button, depending what operating system you subscribe to, click on this, and click on this, so it selects all 3 objects, and I've simply moved it north by exactly $10. These curves just shift up by exactly $10. The way you can convince yourself that I kind of did this here is, right, the point where the old average variable cost and the new average variable cost curve reach their minimum is exactly at the same quantity. The point where the old and the new average total cost curve reach their minimum is at the same quantity, and the distance between these two is exactly $10. The old marginal cost curve cuts through the minimum of the old average variable and old average total cost curve. The new marginal cost curve, which is exactly $10 above the old marginal cost curve, cuts through the minimum of the new average variable and new average total cost curve with the tax. Max, why do we care? Okay? We're going to get something called the supply curve out of this picture. All right? The firm's supply curve, how many units it produces at any given price, comes directly out of this picture, as we'll see in a lecture or two. So what a tax does to the marginal cost curve, which will end up being our supply curve, is really, really important, because what we'll see is that a specific tax actually shifts around the short-run supply curve, which will influence the firm's optimal output decision. So again, this is not just graphical harassment here. What this is actually teaching us that a specific tax shifts around the marginal average variable and average total cost curve, and a lump sum tax doesn't. But Max, you haven't shown us that a lump sum tax hasn't, and I am terribly afraid that you're going to try to. You're absolutely correct. So the lump sum tax, what does the lump sum tax do? Lump sum tax, again, that's the sort of hot dog stand licensing fee. You just charge a one-time fee in order to operate. It's independent of quantity. So what a lump sum tax of $10 does is whatever your costs were before, your costs after being charged a lump sum tax are simply $10 higher than your total costs were before. What does that mean for your average variable costs? As you increase output, is that lump sum tax dependent on output? 2 choices. No, I like that answer better. All right? No, right? It's a one-time fee. It's independent of output. It's not a variable cost. It's a fixed cost thing, right? You pay it once. Once you've paid it, it's sunk. You can't get it back. It's part of your fixed costs. So the average variable cost after is exactly the same as the average variable cost before, because there's no Q on this particular term in the cost curve. So a lump sum tax goes into your fixed costs. A variable cost goes into your variable costs. So the average variable cost stays the same. So since it goes into your fixed costs per unit, right? If that hot dog stand sells 10 units of hot dogs, what's its average fixed cost? Is its average fixed cost after the lump sum higher than before or not? Yeah, Max, that's a badly phrased question. What do you mean by fixed costs? Well, it's fixed operating costs, or now it's capital costs, plus the lump sum tax, right? So before, he or she just paid R times K over Q in terms of average fixed costs. Now he or she pays R times K plus the $10 lump sum divided by Q. So the average fixed costs go up by 10 over Q units, right? So your average fixed costs are higher by 10 over Q units. Your average variable costs stay the same. So the only thing that changes is your average fixed costs, they go up by 10 over Q. So your average total costs go up by 10 over Q dollars. Now they shift up, but not by a constant $10, but they shift up by an ever-increasing amount depending on how much you produce. Hold on, your output is increasing that way, right? So if you produce really little, let's say you sell 1 hot dog, the average lump sum tax you pay per hot dog is $10. If you sell 1 million hot dogs, right, the average lump sum tax per hot dog is $10 over 1 million. It's a fraction of a penny. So this is the average total cost increases in output, right, but by ever less so as output gets larger. What about marginal cost? If I want to produce 1 more unit, right, does the average fixed cost actually affect my marginal cost? No, right? It's paid off, it's sunk, it's done, it's in a bucket somewhere. So the marginal cost stays the same. So what happens? Average variable cost stays the same, marginal cost stays the same, and